Good morning and welcome to the New Orleans Imperative. This is your host, Renard Sanders, talking about the unpopular truths in this publicly funded private school district. For those of you all that are listening to us for the first time, we'd like to welcome you to the New Orleans Imperative. And we're here every Monday morning, as I mentioned. And for those of you all that are rejoining us, we'd like to welcome you back. This program this morning, we're going to talk about something a little different, and we're going to talk about wealth and the equity gap. This week, the Southern Regional Asset Building Coalition will be holding its national conference here at the Astor Crown on September 24th to 26th. And the title of the conference is Closing the Racial Gap, Innovative Strategies for Solutions. The featured speaker for this particular conference, which is a very important conference, is Dr. Michael Sherraden, and we'd like to welcome him this morning. Good morning, Dr. Sherraden.
Good morning, Dr. Sanders.
And it's a pleasure for you to take your time to talk with us a little bit about something that's important, and I think that's something that affects everyone. And while we do have a lot of social issues that are going on, looks like all of our social issues are all undergirded by the lack of resources and poverty and those kinds of things. So I'm very happy for you to come on this morning and to talk a little bit about your presentation this week, Working and Living in the Shadows of Economic Fragility, and just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you see the problem is as it relates to this whole, racial wealth gap. I know that's a lot.
That's a big question. I'll try to frame it the way I think about it. I think that in general, labor income, especially at the bottom, is not as strong a support as it used to be. The economy actually is generating greater inequality in incomes. And our strategy for relying on labor incomes and then some kinds of welfare assistance to supplement that income is, in my view, not going to be adequate for supporting households and enabling households to be stable and productive going forward. It's actually not entirely about race, but it turns out that, of course, these statistics are much worse for people of color, and especially African Americans and Native Americans. We don't talk a lot about, and also Latinos. So we're generating more inequality. People of color are taking that, getting hit harder by that, and we have to ask the question very seriously about if we want to run the country successfully. Country is becoming, majority white people will fade away. In the not too distant future, we will be a country of very different kinds of people in very large numbers. So if we're going to have a country that works successfully, we're going to have to bring everyone into that productive economy. And I don't think that labor income alone is enough to do that.
Okay.
So I think we need to start building assets as part of an answer to support households so they can raise and educate their children, and we can all be better off together.
Yeah, now you are cited as one of the creators of AmeriCorps. Could you tell us a little bit about that and what led to your involvement with AmeriCorps?
Okay, that's a different question, but actually in some ways not unrelated. I'm very interested in youth development and youth transition to adulthood early in my career. I was interested in what kinds of strategies would be successful, so I did my doctoral dissertation, this is a long, long time ago, on the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, which was a very successful project. And it enabled, during a very difficult economic time, enabled some young adults to have a job and do constructive work and get through a tough period and then transition into the labor market. Actually, some of them transitioned into soldiers in World War II because followed on the heels of the Depression. So very successful project. I was very interested in what it was doing. I studied various kinds of service projects in different countries after that, and then I was part of a group that build up a body of work and policy proposals that did lead to the creation of AmeriCorps in 1993.
Yeah, well, AmeriCorps is very, very active here in the city of New Orleans, particularly post-Katrina, with working with a lot of non-for-profits and giving them, a valuable hand, so to speak, an invaluable hand. So that's why I went there. But getting back to the whole, this whole equity gap, a wealth gap, and you mentioned that you don't think that labor could do it alone. Could you kind of tell us what is the solution to this gap that we have that causes all of these, other kind of problems and collateral damage?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that contribute to the racial wealth gap, and it won't come as a surprise to your listeners that this has deep historical roots in America, with property owning and accumulating resources. People have not had equal access to those opportunities. So we're in a situation today where the average person of color has something like 1/20th of the net worth of the average white household. It's really quite shocking difference. Our view is that holding assets is a little bit different from income. Assets enable people to invest in the future, think in the more in the long term, and to have such inequality in asset holding, I think, and evidence shows really puts a damper on the ability of households to develop and raise their children. So our view is that there should be direct efforts to include everyone in the country in building at least some assets so they can have stability and progress over the years.
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the problems that we're facing in terms of putting people in position to do that, in terms of making them politically, socially, and economically, viable to participate is education. And, we're going through some very different reforms in public education these days with privatizations and charter schools, which includes privatization, charter schools, and vouchers. But when we look at the academic success of our kids, we find that our children that come from middle-class families and those above middle-class and upper-class families do quite well. But the whole issue that we're failing poor and minority students still yet, and the numbers are not getting any better in terms of that. How important is this whole issue of having a viable public education system related to creating the equity or the income beyond just the labor kinds of stuff? How important is that, particularly given
obviously it's very important. Education is very highly correlated with success of that generation, and education of parents is very highly correlated with success of children. So there's no question that education ought to be emphasized. We don't view these as entirely separate issues. We're working now to build college savings accounts for whole populations, not just wealthy people. And we're doing research, for example, in the state of Oklahoma. And we picked Oklahoma because it has large subpopulations of blacks and Hispanics and Native Americans. So it allows us to study all these populations very well. And so we gave college savings accounts to 1,300 children randomly, and following them in 1,300 controls, and actually learning quite a lot about if there's just a savings account for a child in the household, what does it do to affect that child's development and chances for success. And we know from other research that parents' expectations for education matter, and we've shown in this research that if there's a savings account for a child's education, then the parents will have more positive views and hold those views more strongly for education of their children. These kids are only 8 years old now, so we don't know their educational outcomes yet. But their parents think that they will do better. We know that the kids have better social emotional development at age 4 was the last time we surveyed them, and we know the mothers have a more positive outlook. So I guess what I would say is there are things that we can do. It's not impossible task to think about giving kids a college savings account. It would be actually relatively easy to do that public policy, and we're trying to work on strategies that can move in that direction.
Yeah. Okay. Now, that is very important that we understand that, and definitely we'd be looking forward to hear how that study come along, at different milestones and those kinds of things. But for a parent, for a person that is listening to this program today, African American family, basically middle class or below the middle class, that has 2 children. What are some of the kinds of things that parents should be emphasizing to children, and that they should maybe be doing themselves in terms of, trying to close that gap, or even preparing their children to, even close that gap even further? What are the kinds of things, when you mention, when you talk in your presentation, living in the shadows, and those kinds of things? What are the kinds of things that we're talking about?
Well, it's difficult because if we're talking about asset building, the strategies that are available to most middle income and below households are not they're not the same strategies that are more easily available to wealthier households. So we have half the population that doesn't have a retirement account offered at work, for example, and that makes a huge difference. If there's no retirement account offered at work, then there's less opportunity to save for retirement, and that's the way that most middle and lower middle income households accumulate something is through a retirement account or through equity in a home. And we know that home owning also is not the same percentage for people of color as white people, and we know that a large proportion of the subprime loans went to people of color, and they took a pretty hard hit during the recession. So a lot of assets have been lost in the last since 2008 in the recession for people of color, and haven't fully recovered. So I look at this as, I think there are things that parents can do, but basically, it's not a fair, people operating with different rules out there. Yeah. Low-income people don't have a retirement account at work, and they don't get that tax subsidy for saving in that retirement account if they don't have it. So, and wealthier people get an even larger tax subsidy because they have a higher marginal tax rate. So there are things that can be done in public policy and in the private sector and financial services that could be positive. If you're asking me how do parents, given the current situation, how do parents cope? I guess what I would say is what we know is that if you're raising your children, it's really important to, of course, instill that your children, are going to college. They should just grow up with the idea that they're going to go to college, and it will help them. We know that it will help them and reinforce that if they have a savings account for their college education, and the kids know that. So that may sound like a small thing, but it's a very positive thing that almost every parent can do.
Yeah. Now, let's move over to the policy side. And, you mentioned, and you're absolutely right, we find that many people don't have retirement accounts at work. But we also find that, much of the private sector are unwilling to pay, retirement accounts and those kinds of things. From a policy standpoint, what kinds of things would need to happen to help bring people, out of the depths of poverty, so to speak?
Well, my view about this is that we now subsidize, and we meaning the public sector. Public sector now subsidizes retirement accounts through tax benefits at something in the neighborhood of $100 billion a year. At least almost all of that goes to the top half of the income distribution, and really most of it goes to the top 10%. So we've got people in the top 1% of the income distribution who have literally millions of dollars in their retirement accounts, and they're still getting public benefits for increasing those amounts every year. So this is a broken public policy. This is public policy. We're talking about welfare transfers to the top end on a large scale. So it would be sensible to have, if we're going to support people's retirement, it would be sensible and better public policy if everybody got the same amount. Not that some people get $20,000 a year and most of the population gets nothing. So I would start with if I could change these things, and they're very hard to change, I would start with just making public policy fair. It treats everybody the same, doesn't treat wealthy people more positively than other people.
So let me slow that down a little bit and go back to the beginning of that answer. So you're saying about $100 billion a year it goes towards some type of pensions out in this country, and you're stating that the people at the top get more of a share of that $100 million than the other folks. Is that basically?
Yeah, $100 billion. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, they get not just a larger share. People at the top get almost all of it. So. So people like you and me, Dr. Sanders, who are kind of, maybe upper middle income, we get a little bit.
Yeah. But we low income compared to them, though.
Yes, that's right. And then people who don't earn as much as you and I, and that half the population and more, then they get really nothing of this public. This is public subsidy. This subsidy goes overwhelmingly to the top end and overwhelmingly to the top 1%. So this is not, by any measure, this is not good governance. This is not what the Congress intended when it passed the legislation for 401ks. This is just taking public resources and transferring to the top. It's using government policy to generate inequality, and that's not what business a government ought to be in. The government ought to be in the business of supporting households so they can raise their children. And so this is just so broken that I hope people are beginning to talk about this more. I think we need to talk about it a lot more. It would be a start just to take that money and distribute it fairly across the whole population.
So when that policy change that you're talking about would be in the rules that are the rules that guide the 401k, is that?
That's correct.
Okay. So right now those rules are steered toward just making the folks at the top fatter, while the rest of the folks are really get little or none of that.
That's exactly right. I don't think that when the Congress created 401ks, they intended this. I'm sure they didn't. But this is just the nature of the subsidy as a tax benefit, and employers are not required to offer 401ks at work. So the combination of these two things has made all the benefits go toward the top.
So just to add something to that, what happens when we find many cities in some states, like Wisconsin, and some public entities now, have turned it over to contractors like charter schools, and they are not offering any retirement benefits. They don't want to offer. They want to shake those retirement benefits, and they say that those that the government pays too much for retirement for its employees, and it's breaking our system, and we need that money to do other things. Isn't there some kind of disconnect there when you want to take from, certainly people that don't make a lot of money, their retirement, while you give subsidies to, Exxon and Bank of America and those things?
Well, I would certainly view it that way, but I mean, I think you should. I mean, for starters, just ask in the existing subsidies for retirement. If just keep the conversation in retirement, the first thing you could say is that the public sector is subsidizing retirement a lot, but mostly to the top. So I would put. I think it's good for the government to support people in their old age. I don't have any problem with that. But if we're gonna do that, it ought to be fair. And I guess that's the point I would make. So it's not even fair. Even within the retirement system, never mind that we subsidize Exxon and other companies in other ways. Even the retirement system is supporting the rich.
Yeah, and the reason why I ask, and maybe I'm mixing apples and oranges a little bit, is because we do find that many policymakers in state and in federal government are basically stating that that they don't think public agencies should have a retirement, should pay, or they're paying too much, and we need to get rid of these retirement benefits, and that's why our children don't have any of this, so that's why we can't supply these services. So that is really an apples and oranges conversation, so to speak.
Yeah, well, that's a broader conversation about what is the proper role of government and what should government spend its resources on, and people will have different views about that, of course. And I think it's an important role of government to enable households to be stable and raise the next generation. I think that's any smart government would want to do that. Okay. But other people will have different views about all that. That's a political process. My main point is, if we're going to support asset accumulation, it just ought to be fair. I think that really is not debatable in the same way. I mean, by any standard, it's bad governance if you're going to just take public money and support rich people. I don't think if you put that question to the country, I don't think even rich people would say that's a good idea. But of course, they're happy to accept the benefits.
Oh yeah. Now, besides the 401k, I guess that's a biggie. What other things can happen on the policy side to more or less equal a playing field a little bit?
Well, the president has started My RA, really an attempt to fill the gap in the 401k system. So trying to encourage all employers, even for lower income people, to support the My RA and really a set of procedures that make that fairly easy. And I think some employers will be able to respond to that, and more low-income people will have a retirement account. But the My RA has no public support, has no benefit. So I would just say that's fine. It's a good thing. Now if we're going to do that, then we should also then provide similar benefits to the My RA people who, as we do to the top 1% with their 401k. If it's public money, spend it fairly. Everybody gets the same amount.
Gotcha. We're going to take our first caller, Stephen, right quick. Good morning, Stephen. Welcome to the New Orleans Imperative.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning. A question, a comment, please?
Now, I've been listening just for the past update, about 10 minutes. Yeah. I apologize if you have to double talk to explain one thing. But the one thing that I really caught is it really feasible for them to actually be able to, like I said, everybody gets a certain amount, for their retirement, and then say for like the upper echelon of people that have income, like the top 1% and top 10%, or if they can still get the same amount that everybody else gets, and then if they want to put more to keep up their lifestyle, then that's on them, on their part alone. Is it possible to set a policy to that can be structured that way?
Dr. Sanders, do you want me to take
that? I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think the reception was a little bad here, but I think I heard the question. You're asking, is it feasible? I think politically now, this is not it's not feasible. I mean, it's not. We can go to the current Congress and change those rules. No, but I think until people start talking about it, we have no possibility of making it feasible in the future. So, I think it's important to talk about it. I think it's important to think about alternatives. Really, what I think would work in the long run is we're working on strategies to start every child with an account when they're born, and hopefully that becomes a lifelong account, and then. If that's the case, if everybody has an account, think about it this way: if everybody had a 401k or something similar, then it puts on the table for public policy. Well, everybody's in the same system, but some people are getting a lot more subsidy than others. So why should this be? I think it would force the discussion. So what we're working on is policy strategies that put everyone in, and because it's easier to do with children, we, for example, have no problem talking with Republicans and Democrats and everybody about every child having an account. For political purposes, it's just a much easier discussion. So we're starting with children and trying to build toward the idea of a lifelong account. If everybody's included, then I think it forces the discussion of, well, why are public resources going to some people and not to other people? So that's our strategy. We have some success in this. This year, Maine announced that every child would get an account when they're born and automatically, and Nevada has just announced that every kindergartner will get an account with a deposit automatically. So, and we're talking with several other states now. It's easier to work in the states right now than it is the federal government, which is kind of a little dysfunctional. But eventually, I think this can be a national conversation. I don't think it's a conversation that happens in 1 or 2 weeks or 1 or 2 years, but I think it can be a positive conversation, and we can make progress. Okay,
thank you very much, Stephen.
Yeah, one last question.
Sure.
All right. Now, how possible is it, for everyone to have, to push a policy to where every employer puts in a retirement plan, somewhat like 401k, or what would be better to further that cause?
I know it. I don't think that that's impossible to reach for. In fact, when President Clinton was in office, we worked a lot with the Clinton White House, and the president did propose at one point what he called universal savings account. That's a name that we thought of here. So, that would be that every worker would be in a retirement system. So he made that proposal. It didn't go anywhere at the time, but the proposal has been made, at that level, and I don't think it's completely far-fetched. There will be a lot of work to do to get there, but people are starting to work toward that.
Okay, Stephen, I got to run. Thank you for calling to New Orleans Imperative.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the whole, this has been a very interesting conversation, and you've kind of shared with me, and educated me on the differences in terms of this $100 billion, and so the rest of the country and this whole 401k, which a lot of people in the private sector have, we're basically it is more than an unlevel playing field. I mean, that is seriously tilted.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's not even close, and that is a huge gorilla in the room, and a huge gorilla to get out the room too. I would imagine that to get Congress to change those kinds of laws would be enormous. Would you say?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't want to be overly optimistic about that. It's a very uphill struggle from here, but I don't think in the long term it's impossible. I think it's reachable.
Okay. But that is the biggest nut to crack, so to speak. That whole piece right there, which could balance out, because I would have to say, 80% of the population has 401ks, would you say?
No, the percentage of the population with a 401k is less than 50% now.
Okay. Well, of the people that do have a pension, Is it still less than 50?
Well, very few people have, the old style defined benefit pensions now. So almost everybody who has a retirement account, or not almost everybody, but the majority now have a defined contribution plan, most often a 401k or something like that. So the point about, I guess what you could say if you want to understand it overall, is about half the population has a retirement account. Of the people who have a retirement account, the distribution of public benefits is still very unequal. People who make more money get more benefits. And then half the population doesn't have any kind of retirement account at work, and 30% of the population has no retirement savings. So I guess you just say this is if the purpose of the 401k system is to help people with their retirement savings, it's not really working for at least half the population. And even for those who have it, a good portion of people have very small balances in their 401k, so it's really not going to support them in retirement. So it's a badly broken retirement policy, I would say that.
Yeah. That is really really interesting, and it really really kind of adds to the tilting that we have of other things in this country, in related to just the distribution of wealth. That a small percentage of people collect more of the wealth. I think I read something the other day that the Walton family, has such a large percentage of wealth, of the income. Wealth in this country is just it's just amazing. That we have gone to that. Gone to that level. It's that we a country that is so tilted even in that area too.
That's right. That brings up a related but slightly different point. So the Walton family is accumulating all this wealth, and at the same time, the public sector is literally supporting their workforce with public benefits because they don't pay them enough to support a household. So food stamps and other benefits that go to people who work for the Walton family are probably, I don't know what the number is, but you could probably measure that in hundreds of millions or billions of dollars a year.
Wow. Yeah. And there's other information that that most of the workers are on public assistance.
That's correct. So basically in that case, and this relates to the severe income inequality that we've generated. In that case, then the public sector is providing some support, not a lot of support to those low-income workers, and it just translated into larger profits for the corporations that don't pay these workers enough to support a household.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Well, look, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for taking time from your schedule, this morning, and I know you'll be here later this week to discuss this very important topic. Even though this is a show about public education, what public education to me is that, preparing students to be socially and to be able to participate in society socially, economically, and politically. And, this whole issue of wealth and being able to survive in this, very bad economy, it's just so important. And people need to understand that wealth gap and what advantages and what disadvantages you do have, So I think it's very, very important, and it's so closely related to, the kinds of things that we need to be doing with our children.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for taking time from your schedule, and you have a great day. And hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you at the conference.
I'm looking forward to being in New Orleans, and thanks very much for having me on the program.
Okay. Bye-bye. Our next guest is Jason France from the blog Crazy Crawfish, and Jason has been on the air before, and Jason is going to talk with us this morning. And he's running for office, which we can't talk about too much on the air because of our rules relative to that. But he is going to talk to us this morning about test scores and the declining test scores here in Louisiana. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning, Dr. Sanders. How you doing?
I'm okay. A few weeks ago, you did a blog called Standardized Lying, and
Yeah.
you talked about how student performance in Louisiana is dropping rapidly. Now, as you know much better than me. You're a very quantitative person, and I'm more on the other side of the fence. But all of the education reformers, and I say that, you know, I don't delicately, but all education reformers say that we're doing so great and we're doing well, and the schools have improved and those kinds of things. So why don't you kind of tell us what drew you to this conclusion that they are dropping so rapidly? And there are other people that agree with you too, but I just find your blog so interesting.
Okay. Well, actually, it's some information that I pulled from Michael Deschatel's Louisiana Educator blog, and from some analysis from Herb Bassett, who's a math teacher and band director up and teacher in North Louisiana. And he's been studying school performance scores and test results for a while.
Yeah,
so,
I've had him on the program too.
Yeah. So what's going on here? And I've been trying to figure out because I've been told about this from insiders for a while, and I've been trying to narrow down or put a finger on exactly how it is they've been managing this. The first thing is actually the reformers and John White didn't even actually say in this last results that the scores are going up. He said that they've been steady, I guess, was the term that he used. They've been holding steady.
So we don't hear these terms unprecedented academic success anymore, right? I mean,
yeah,
we were hearing that for about 4 or 5 years.
They're having to rig it to even hold the score steady. I mean, and what I was told and what these results confirm is that when they're trying to figure out how to spin the scores and determine how the state's done, they look at the recovery school district and the charters, the reform heavy areas, and they try to calculate the scores based on different gyrations and calculations where those are shown in the best light. So for school performance scores, they'll give them bonus points, and they'll only give bonus points for certain categories that those areas in RSD and the charters do well in. For instance, in the last bonus point deal is students that pulled up from like one of the lowest categories to basic or something like that, instead of kids that improve at higher levels. What they've been doing is they've been fiddling with the lowest end of the spectrum, the basic classification. And they've been trying to say that Louisiana students, and in particular the RSD students, that they don't have any RSD students anymore because they had to close them all. But that's a separate issue. They were doing so poorly, they realized that they had to close them to get out of the criticism that they would have. But charters and other folks were doing so poorly that they needed to goose the scores in a way. And what happened is in order to pass or get basic right now, you only need to get about 40% of the material correct. And these tests are mostly multiple choice with about 4 or 5 answers, some true false, I think. So what that means is you can almost just pick the same answer all the way down a test and get basic. Now, there are some constructed response, which is not multiple choice, but the majority of the test is multiple choice. So a more realistic approach would be like, let's say a student has only 10 or 15% of the material. And they guess for the rest of the test. What the analysis shows is that most likely they'll get basic and pass, and as a result, they'll get bonus points. All of this is done through scoring, through changing the way the tests are scored. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we're kind of hearing that thing that's the similar thing that's happening at individual schools too. But in other words, we've lowered
at the state level rather than instead of just manipulating the test booklets and erasing the answers. The state is actually manipulating the scores and what the cutoff levels are.
The scales. They're manipulating the scales, so to speak.
Yep.
In other words, what would be a C and what would be a D. So now, what we would have considered an F is now
and
a C or D.
What was considered an F prior, what was, So the success that they've been touting in the Recovery School District, showing more kids getting basic and above and things like that, it's all fabricated. It's based on lowering the actual score that you needed and the amount of material you needed to pass in order to get that basic. And it looks like it's actually, from looking at it, it looks like the students are actually doing worse.
Well, but the thing that really bothers me and should bother everyone in the city of New Orleans is that the reforms that they are pushing across the state, and that is just infested, so to speak, into New Orleans, into the New Orleans Public School District, was all about high standards and how we're going to make these kids world class. We're going to make these schools world class, and how the work is going to be.
And they've lowered the actual standards.
Yes. And that's what is so frightening in terms of what does it hold for a New Orleans public school student today that's graduating. So one of the things that they have, that they continually throw is that some years ago a student at Fortier was a val and failed the leap and had to take it a few times before they passed. But at least there was some standard there that child had to meet, even if you accepted that as a reason for taking over the school, right? At least there was a standard that the child had to make that grade. Well, here we are in a reform that some people call a renaissance, and here we are in a situation where they're touting it all over the country as the model for turning school districts around is to actually require less and expect less of kids academically.
Oh yeah. That's they I think they thought this would work, and what happened is they realized it was having the opposite effect. It was working in reverse, but they still wanted to push it. But what's actually I talked to a teacher in New Orleans. I was down there this last weekend, and in one of the charters. She's like a 15-year veteran teacher, and she was saying that she had gotten out of the charter business. She had 8th graders in her class. They'd been in the Recovery School District and the charters their whole lives, since Katrina.
Yeah.
And she had a school with class, like they couldn't read and write.
Wow.
So how do you, they obviously have been socially promoted. And what was happening is they were acting out, and so they have these strict disciplinary policies, so they are able to kick these students out and send them somewhere else and on the street, and that seems to be the status quo. That seems to be the way things are working down there, where, the kids are being promoted without actually learning any material. We're being told that they're doing exceptionally well, but they actually can't read and write, and then we enact these disciplinary policies where we get them out of the schools.
Yeah. And just for the listening audience, I just want to talk about one particular school that was, and this information was sent to me by Reverend Willie Calhoun, who's the head of the Lower Ninth Ward School Group. And what he's stating is that Renew School, which has several schools here, the Renew Charter Network, I guess you want to call them. They have 3 or 4 schools. Got them all of a sudden, have grown, by leaps and bounds in the last 4 to 5 years. Their grading scale, according to Reverend Calhoun, is that a 90 to 100 is advanced. A 89 to a 74 is mastery. Now listen to this. A 73 to 50 is basic. That's a 23-point spread. And then a 49 to 45 is approaching basic. So
what is that? What kind of test is that?
I don't know if that's their grading scale. Well, it's listed here as their grading scale per se. But if that's their grading scale, and if they're sending grades home to Renard Jr., saying that he is basic, and literally, my son is 50%.
Yeah,
proficient.
Actually, that's similar to what they're doing in for the state standardized tests, the LEAP tests and everything. 40% of the material is basic.
So that means that if you get 4 out of 10 answers right, you okay.
You're great. Yeah, you're average is what they're saying. And what's even more alarming is 35% of the state is below that. 35% is below 4 out of 10, which you should be able to get with 4 answers. You should be able to, if you're just randomly, you would get like, I guess, 25%. If, so if you had, if you knew about 10 to 15% of the material and you guessed the other, you should be able to get that.
Now, but with that being said, we have the head of the Bessie Board, Chaz Roma, and the superintendent that wants to go to court to implement these new tests, this Common Core, this test based on the Common Core called a PARC. I guess our kids are all being in the single digits on that test.
Yeah, and what they did with this last test bout is they included PARC test questions on it, and that's why they actually had to curve the results so much. So you only needed 40%.
Yeah,
and that was just on a partial PARC test. Now they're going to go full PARC, which other states like New York and a couple other eastern states have already used it, and they found that their kids were getting like 20%, 30% of the test correct. So they had to, and they were all failing. Because of the way it was outlined. You should expect that. I mean,
but in Louisiana, there's profit in failure. So we're going to take Karen Harper Royal right quick. Good morning, Karen. Welcome again to the New Orleans Imperative.
Good morning, and good morning, Jason.
Hey, good morning.
Good to hear from you.
You too.
You bring up some very good points, and I just want to encourage parents to not only find out what the grading scales are at their own child's school, ask to see what the grading scale is at some of the higher performing schools. I guarantee you it is vastly different. As many people know, my son graduated from Lusher, and certainly that is not the grading scale at Lusher. And then I want parents to, so they may think their child is doing well because they're scoring well on that particular type of grading scale at a school like the Renew School. But then you start to look at the Renew High School anyway, their ACT rates. You look at any of these schools' ACT scores, and you see that there's a huge disconnect between your child's grade point average, and you're thinking your child's doing wonderful, and you look at the school as a whole, and the whole school, they aren't earning ACT scores that could get them into any 4-year Louisiana college. Parents definitely have to start connecting the dots and looking at what these schools are doing to give the illusion of success. Just because your child is making A's and B's at a mediocre recovery school district charter school does not mean that they are prepared for college. Some of these kids who graduated from many of the RSD high schools are finding out right now that in spite of their A's and B's, they're not prepared for college. And it really does these children a disservice. Parents just got to start pushing back on some of this. They are the ones who are in the position to know what their children are actually learning in school. And through working with some of the other groups out there, they can find out what their children should be learning.
Well, I really believe that parents should do that. But shouldn't we hold our policymakers, particularly the Louisiana Department of Education, for allowing for this fragmentation and allowing for these contractors that call themselves charter schools to send home a basic, telling a child that he is basic, if they have made 50% or approaching basic at 40%, as Jason said, aren't they shouldn't we do something from policymakers too? Aren't they just as responsible for that?
Absolutely, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I understand.
Parents, and when I say parents, I mean parents, grandparents, guardians, everybody. I want to make sure that they are alerted to this, because once those parents get that information for themselves, they could help work collectively to hold these policymakers accountable, because the parents have that firsthand hard evidence of how absurd it is. What these schools are doing, and I think it also borderlines on fraud, especially at the high school level, because manipulating a grade point average can cause some children to qualify for a top scholarship when they really didn't earn a top scholarship. And so that's something many policymakers ought to be looking at. How is it that you are able to earn a top scholarship, but then you can't get past the 17 on the ACT? You know, I mean, how do you have the grade point average to get there, but then you can't even, get past the 17 on the ACT?
Jason, you want to comment on that before we let Karen go?
I mean, the problem we have right now with our policymakers is they've bought into a policy, and they're not really concerned with the results because they've bought it and they believe in it, or they're paid to believe in it, and they're just going to go with it. And so I think it's important for us to investigate these schools and for our communities to hold these schools and these policymakers accountable, for sure. Definitely. I mean, and to write about these in our newspapers and to tell other parents what's going on, because right now a lot of the stuff that gets covered in the media is all positive and people aren't looking at the actual data and the actual results, the end results, the fact that the kids aren't getting aren't qualified really to sustain a career in college. They're not getting the ACT scores that really show that they would be adequately prepared for college. What's encouraging is we've been able to get data. Either Mike Deschatels and Research on Reforms are able to get some data recently as a result of some lawsuits. It's taken some years, but we're going to be able to finally do some studies and hold them accountable. So
this is, it's just a shame that you have to go through this, where the state is not holding itself accountable in providing the citizens, a quality public education, and has really promoted failure and promoted entrepreneurism. But Karen, I got to run. I got to take Miss Naomi before. Thank as always for calling, Karen.
Okay, bye bye.
Good morning, Miss Naomi.
Good morning, Mr. Sanders and your guest. My only question is, how many students and how many community people know about what might be called the dirty little secret that our students, in many instances in these RSD charter schools, are not given books, have not been given books? When I learned that one of the schools that my great nephew attends did not give him any books, I had to go there to the school myself. I almost had a high blood pressure episode. I could not understand. They send these mimeograph sheets of paper, many of which can get wet if it rains. Many of them can get lost. I had another one of my relatives tell me just last week that the sheet of paper sent home that talked about integers and other things, she had to go on the computer to get an understanding about the homework. The question is, what about those many, many individuals and parents who do not have computers, who cannot go on the computer to get the understanding that is made necessary from the mimeograph sheets that are sent home? That's why the continuing situation of failure is taking place, not because our students are innately not intelligent, but because the state of Louisiana continues directly and indirectly to facilitate the poverty-related kinds of things that have resulted in our children not having all of the resources that they need. That's just one dirty little secret, and I'm hoping that the community, as it hears more and more from your station and others, all those things that really end up being education and student abuse perpetrated upon our students will rise up and push back. And there are some people whose names come up all the time, and many of the community hearers know who they are. At the appropriate and appointed time, I hope we all come together to stand around and put a circle around our children and say, no more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Naomi. it is really something that, Jason, you worked in the Louisiana Department of Education, and just to see the, this whole scam that's going on, it is, it's smoke and mirrors, and, they're walking these kids across the stage and they're giving diplomas, and these kids are so ill prepared.
And once that happens, they've lost the best time in their lives when they can be prepared adequately for the rest of their lives.
Yeah,
they've lost that opportunity, and that's the tragedy there.
Yeah, and they're walking them across the stage, and everybody's happy. The parents are happy. Now their child is ready to move forward. And their child really is working, has grades that has such low has grades. These A's and these B's that they have are really less than average, so to speak. But let's take Reverend Calhoun. That'll be our last call, and then we'll let you wrap up, Jason. Good morning, Reverend Calhoun.
Good morning. Good morning to you and Mr. Jason, man. What we wanted to bring your attention to is on last Tuesday, the Orleans Parish School Board dedicated some resources to the RSD. That millage now cements the RSD in this community for the next 20 years. What I wanted to do is invite your listening audience out today to our meeting over at 1700 Cartide, where we will be discussing this millage and how it really impacts our community and what it does to our neighborhood. So we just wanted to make sure that people were aware that of that meeting that's going to go on today.
Since you're
at 5 o'clock.
At 5 o'clock, that's at Christian Unity Baptist Church, correct?
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
okay. Well, thank you for that information. That information that you sent me that I just read on there, that was the renewed grading scale at their school?
Yes, that is. At Schaumburg.
Wow. Okay, Reverend Calhoun, thank you much.
All right, Doc.
Okay. That's really amazing, 50% in NIU basic.
Yeah, I do have something to say about the textbooks if you're interested.
Sure.
What's going on now, because I've been investigating this, and this isn't just a New Orleans issue, actually. This is a statewide issue right now. The Common Core stuff is still in flux, and they haven't really it's not really settled upon, and there's a lot of money and stuff that is associated with buying all new textbooks for all grade levels. And what's happened is, like in East Baton Rouge, we don't have textbooks. In a lot of places, they don't have textbooks for your math and your English because it costs a lot to replace all those, for one thing. And it's not really, people aren't really sure whether or not this is going to be what we stay with and whether they shouldn't spend the money. I mean, I get those sheets every day for my kids, too, unfortunately, and there's no textbooks for us to go on to really understand what the heck we're looking at. So I feel for kids in the higher grades, and for parents that don't have Internet connections, because a lot of the things that I see when I post about those issues is like, well, why don't those parents just go online and look up the lessons there? Well, if you have a half dozen kids, or even 2 or 3, like I do, look and get homework every night, looking up lessons online on an Internet connection is kind of a pain. It's not easy. And if you don't have those abilities, if you don't have a computer and an Internet connection home, it's impossible. You can't help your kids. That is one of many.
And so many of them, many of our homes, many parents' homes don't have internet connections. Don't have the capabilities. Jason, gotta run. Thanks again. And could you give us the blog again so that our listening audience can kind of cue into you, because you have some great articles on there.
Okay. My blog is Crazy Crawfish, one word. .wordpress.com, and WordPress is one word, WORDPRESS.
Okay.
And if you just type crazy crawfish into Google, you'll find it. I'm
Thanks.
one.
Thanks again, Jason. This program will rebroadcast on the NewOrleansImperative.org, the NewOrleansImperative.org. We certainly would like to thank those people that are responsible for us being here. Of course, Real Talk for Real Times, WBOK, Metro and Richards Disposal, Farberg, the New Orleans Educational Equity Roundtable, and the Wisdom Reception Center. I'd like to send our condolences to Mr. Falman Taylor, who passed on yesterday, a former teacher in New Orleans Public Schools, dedicated his life to hundreds of kids up by Crocker School. Stay tuned for Talk What You Know with Reverends Littleton and Reverends Jones. Thank you for listening to the New Orleans Imperative.